Hello there everyone and welcome, it is Niran here, and today it is time for yet another of these Formula Bitesize videos. Now obviously the first one that I did was based on GP2 in its modern form, and you guys really seem to like the idea behind this series and just having, you know, the whole real life sort of news surrounding Formula 1 and open wheel racing on the channel. So I'm really grateful that you guys enjoyed the idea and enjoyed the first episode. It seemed to go down quite well and it got some discussion going in the comments section. So obviously this is a slightly quiet time of year naturally for motorsport news because the season isn't actually running right now. Obviously the season only starts when we get back into the spring months, the likes of March and April obviously. So at the moment, obviously in the off season, there isn't too much to talk about, but there has been one story recently that can spark up some debate. And that is really the unfortunate situation with Manor Racing. Now, just before we get into this, I'd love to know what you guys want to... Well, obviously I'd love to know your thoughts on this particular video, but I'd love to see what you guys want to see as well in terms of future topics. If there's anything you've seen in the news that you want me to talk about in one of these videos, then make sure to drop it in the comments section. If you go on to enjoy the video, then make sure to like the video and subscribe if you're new to the channel, of course, as well. But today, it's another it's a downer. I'm sure there'll be some happy times within this series, but at the moment it's all quite sad, and this is another one of those stories as well, and it's frustrating more than anything because it's something that we have to talk about quite a lot, unfortunately. It's Manor Racing going into administration again. They seem to be in and out on the peripherals of administration on quite a regular basis, and unfortunately it's happened again. And it's natural because they're an underdog team. They're a team that doesn't get much funding or sponsorship or particularly do very well very often, and it's a shame to have to keep going back to this and to keep seeing them in this situation because they seem to turn a corner and then suddenly they're back in the depths of financial difficulties once again. So it's always really disheartening to see a team that I actually really like quite a lot go through these difficult times once again. But for those that aren't too familiar with the story of Manor, we'll just go into like a little background of their presence in Formula 1 and the story itself. So in terms of the history of Manor Racing, they first entered Formula 1 as Virgin Racing back in 2010, obviously with the main sponsorship from the multi-billionaire company being Virgin. They changed their name to Mura Grand Prix and became Russian-based, if you like, as opposed to a British-based team. We're always back, Mark, because they changed their name, I think, to Marussia in 2012, from what I can remember. I may be wrong. It's either 2011 or 2012, as far as I'm aware. Obviously, I think they came into 2010 with the driver lineup of Jerome D'Ambrosio and Lucas Di Grassi, but they've been through quite a few drivers, in all honesty, in their time in Formula 1. Jules Bianchi, of course, scored their first points in Formula 1 4 years after they first entered with a different name. That was in Monaco of 2014 in that hectic race, one of the best races that I've seen in recent years, not ever, but in recent years certainly. Unfortunately though, at the end of that year, despite scoring that point scoring finish, they actually went into administration for the first time in 2014, but were somehow saved. I think even to this day, nobody quite knows how they managed to get out of that situation, but rebranded as Manor Racing, if you like, for the 2015 season. They were late in terms of development. They were about 3 seconds off the pace of everyone. They had probably one of the worst seasons you could possibly imagine, with Will Stevens and Roberto Merri as their drivers, but understandably because they've got out of this situation somehow, but had no real time to develop the car or get any funding or get any sponsorship for the season ahead. They look to have improved fully going into the 2016 season with the driver lineup of Pascal Wehrlein and Rio Haryanto. Haryanto was then obviously replaced by Esteban Ocon towards the end of the season, but in terms of actual performance of the car, they looked a lot, well, certainly a lot closer to everyone else than in 2015, but even in comparison to the years when they first entered as Virgin Racing and Marussia, they seem to be a lot closer to the likes of Renault and Sauber and some of the mid-table teams than ever before, and you sort of got the feeling that with the right investment and the right car development, they could actually make that step into the mid-table in 2017. However, a few days ago, about a week ago probably as I'm recording this, or maybe about 3 or 4 days actually, Manor went into administration again. Now, the situation behind this is going into the penultimate Grand Prix of the season, the Brazilian Grand Prix. Manor sat 10th in the Constructors' Championship due to a 9th position that Pascal Wehrlein, no, a 10th 10th position, sorry, that Pascal Wehrlein had picked up in the Austrian Grand Prix. Sergio Perez crashed out on the final lap, and that gifted Pascal Wehrlein in the Manor 10th position and hence a point. Now, going into the Brazilian Grand Prix, Manor was sat on 1 point, with Sauber in 11th in the Constructors' Championship sat on 0. But unfortunately for Manor, in a pretty hectic Brazilian Grand Prix, Felipe Nasr managed to pick up 9th place and grab 2 points for Sauber, which propelled them above Manor in the Constructors' Championship, and between then and the end of the season, Manor obviously stayed in 11th and last. Now, apparently, their team chief or team principal had said to the staff before the season even started they had to finish 10th in the Constructors' Championship or they'd face an uncertain future going into 2017, which is of course exactly what has happened. 10th place being snatched away from them by Felipe Nasr at his home Grand Prix, grabbing 9th in Brazil, which ironically has not only potentially kicked Manor out of the sport, but has kicked himself out of the sport, because we heard obviously the news that Pascal Wehrlein was going to be driving for Sauber, and he's fully expected to be partnered by Marcus Ericsson, who overall had a much more inspired season, really, than Felipe Nasr, had a much more impressive season than the Brazilian, despite Nasr getting the team's only point. So, in actual fact, him kicking Manor out of the sport has probably ended his chances of staying in the sport itself, because he could potentially have got that drive with Manor, who of course would have been in financial difficulties, could have done with his sponsorship deal, potentially he would have just crossed over from Sauber to Manor, all would have been well, but him getting that 9th place for Sauber has potentially ended his shelf life in the sport as well as Manor's. So with this revelation, it's now starting to make sense as to why Pascal Wehrlein went from Manor to Sauber. Everyone was really expecting him to either get a Force India seat or a Mercedes seat during some point over the winter. Obviously, he was expected to get the Force India seat, that went to Esteban Ocon, and as soon as Nico Rosberg retired, all eyes were pointed towards Pascal Wehrlein, which clearly isn't going to happen now. It's clearly going to be Valtteri Bottas who gets that second Mercedes seat alongside Lewis Hamilton. So Wehrlein was left very much in a catch-22 of either going to Sauber or staying at Manor, and to be honest with you, given the choice, I think he probably would have stayed at Manor. That's probably a much more progressive option than Sauber, who seem to be locked down into being a pretty poor team at the moment. Funding's always been an issue, whereas at least Manor have the Mercedes engines, which are the best on the grid, but obviously without Manor being on the grid, his only option potentially is to go to Sauber, so that makes a lot more sense. It's said that the 9th place finish for Felipe Nasr did actually cost Manor Racing £10 million, which is obviously a decent chunk of cash these days. So that's obviously the reason why Manor have struck these financial difficulties, is because they've lost out on what they projected they would get, being £10 million, which is obviously a lot of money going into the development of a car and the development of a team going into the next season. And I suppose on the topic of prize money, the issue here is we wouldn't really be in this situation with the underdogs constantly being at risk of even being in Formula 1 at all if the prize money wasn't better allocated, because I'll give you an indication. At the end of the 2015 season, supposedly Ferrari got the most prize money out of any team in Formula 1. Which, seems to make sense, apart from the fact they didn't even win the Constructors' Championship. So how is a team that's not winning the Constructors' Championship getting the most amount of prize money from Formula 1 management? Surely it should be a team that wins. Mercedes won the Constructors' Championship in 2015, yet Ferrari got it based on what? Historical value? Because they're already the biggest team in Formula 1. There shouldn't be more prizes given out to the best. There should be a more equal status, because money's hard to come by already for a sport like Formula 1, and teams wanting to venture into Formula 1. They don't then need to be deterred from joining in the knowledge that they're not going to get the same fair treatment as a team that's been in the sport for a long time. There's no longevity there. There's no sustainability for a sport that just gives all of its prizes to the teams that have been there for ages, because then the teams that want to join aren't going to get fairly treated. It makes absolutely no sense at all. And the minnows of Formula 1 need to be protected. The likes of Minardi and Orange Arrows actually contributed a decent amount to the sport purely by being there, to be quite honest with you. And of course also provided underdog stories. The likes of Mark Webber getting 5th place in a Minardi in Australia at his home Grand Prix on his debut, I think, in Formula 1. Jos Verstappen was in a situation where he was like second in the Malaysian Grand Prix back in 2001. Markus Winkelhock leading the German Grand Prix in a spiker in 2008, and these things don't happen unless you've got the small teams in the sports, and you also just don't have the numbers on the grid. You don't have the the plethora of talent that is in Formula 1 and in and around Formula 1 in open wheel racing getting onto the grid if you've only got 6 teams there. Formula 1 can't be sustained on just factory teams because not enough manufacturers are wanting to join. It's a losing venture unless you know you're going to win. That's why people like Renault have gone and then, you know, decided to come back, obviously, but a lot of manufacturers decide to leave because they know they're not winning. And there's only real gain out of Formula 1 when you are winning, when you're a Mercedes, when you're a Ferrari, or when you're a Renault or whatever. You know, if you have a period of success, that's really the only thing that's going to keep you in Formula 1. So what needs to be done? I've already really sort of touched upon this, but there needs to be a fairer distribution of prize money in Formula 1, because this is the only way we're going to stop things like this happening. And obviously teams are going to go out of business and are going to get replaced. It's always happened, even when the whole of the globe wasn't in a massive recession, but especially now. You know, if you're going to be giving out a ridiculous amount of prize money generally, it needs to be shared out better than it is, because teams like Ferrari are getting 10 times more than teams like Sauber and Manor, and it just makes no sense, because, you know, if you have a smaller amount between each team, you're way more likely to have all of those teams surviving into the next season. You know, sponsors aren't as easy to come by as they were in the early thousands and stuff. I mean, like, a team like Arrows being sponsored by a massive company like Orange you're never going to get that now. You're never going to get that sort of sponsorship running through the entirety of Formula 1, through all of the teams anymore. It's just not going to happen. The small teams rely basically solely on either pay drivers, which is one thing that's going to become ever more present if the prize money remains as skewed as it is, or just purely through prize money itself. You can't, I mean, you know, Manor being in a situation where they know they're going to die out if they don't get 10th in the championship. The irony is, Sauber would probably be in this exact same position if they'd finished 11th in the championship, had they not got that backing from a Swiss bank earlier on in the season. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous, because you're just going to end up with an elimination style of Formula 1 where every team that comes last in a Constructors' Championship just gets turfed out of the sport until you've got Ferrari and Mercedes left, and Renault maybe as factory teams. And that's just not... It's just not entertaining. We need to have more teams in Formula 1. I'd love to know what you guys think about this story and about this discussion in the comments section. I get the feeling you'll all have a fairly similar view, but if you do have anything, you know, contrasting, then make sure to drop that in the comment section as well. I'd love to hear all of your guys' thoughts as well, because you can look at it from two ways. You know, either we need to keep as many teams in the sport as possible, but you could also look at it from the fact of a team's won the Constructors' Championship, they deserve to be given more money, or to be given more prizes than the team that came last. It makes more sense, but at the end of the day, you're never going to get any change if the big teams keep getting all the investment and the small teams keep getting no investment. Then, you know, what change are you going to get? But whatever the circumstance, I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. If you did, then make sure to hit the likes button, and again, suggest any other stuff that you want to see in Formula Bitesize down in the comment section below. Subscribe if you're new to the channel as well. But it's been a pleasure ranting at you guys today. Have a great day, enjoy yourselves, and goodbye.
I wanna say yes, yes. Hope I see you next time. Said I want to be